Welcome to the GridMod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, welcome to the GridMod Pod. Today we have a special series where we're going to kind of talk all things AEIC, but specifically talk about one of our committees, the Safety Committee. So today we have Paul Grigaux, who's the Vice President of Distribution for Southern California Edison, and he has taken the lead of this committee, and we're going to talk really about what it is, how we can be involved, and really what the value of the committee is for the larger organization. But before we get started, Paul, take a time to kind of introduce yourself, give us your background, and we'll jump into everything else.
So my background, I've been with Edison for almost 19 years and played a variety of roles throughout transmission distribution, and essentially had the opportunity of leading pretty much every department one way or the other. So that was a great opportunity to be able to get a good sense as to what it takes to get T&D to take, at least within SCE. Prior to that, I worked for other companies. I worked for an equipment manufacturer, providing services to utilities for a few years. And then prior to that, I worked for a utility, but on the non-regulated side. I actually started my career, I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, by the way. And I started my career in the industrial gases industry. For about 10 years, I was a field engineer commissioning equipment throughout the United States.
So very well versed to speak on this topic. So one thing about the utility space and really what AEIC is for some of our newer listeners, it's a utility member ran organization. So it has been around since 1885. It was a part of really all of the companies that were using Thomas Edison's technology at the time started to come together. At first, it was 6 utilities. And at the time, they were called companies because they were really just fun history fact, installing dynamos. And then they had like a kit to pretty much stand up and create grids depending on the size and territory that they were overseeing. But with that, they would come together and talk all things operational excellence in regards to how to operate, maintain, and really keep the lights on starting at the turn of the century. So this association really has been around for the last 140 years, and the different utility members come together on a recurring basis to talk all things to the particular committee. And some of our original listeners, it really stemmed from the Distributed Energy Resource Committee, where we talked all things DER. And now with the GridMod Pod, we're really speaking to all of the various committees. And today we're going to talk about, as I said, safety, which, Paul, you are the fearless leader of that. So why don't you jump in and share, how's it structured and how's it led? And then we'll get into like what you guys are currently doing.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I've been part of the AEIC Power Delivery Committee, which is the parent committee of the Safety Subcommittee, if you will, for about 11 years. And we always had safety in our biannual meetings as a key theme. From the beginning to the end of our 3-day sessions. And then subsequently in between meetings, we had a number of efforts that were officer-led, right? The Power Delivery Committee is attended by officers from the various utilities that attend that committee. And we would send occasionally a handful of questions that were always safety focused. But interestingly enough, through all the subcommittees that we created over the years, we never had a safety subcommittee, and it dawned on us a couple of years ago that was a big miss and a big gap. And so, as a result of a very sad event that occurred at SCE about a year and a half ago, we decided to take the lead and proposed to the Power Delivery Committee that we should set up a safety subcommittee, which was endorsed unanimously very quickly by all the Power Delivery members. And so we set it up in May of last year, so just about 9-10 months ago. And it's structured like every other committee. We have a chair and we have actually several vice chairs and a liaison and a variety of other roles. The way we set up our team is so I'm the chair for the first couple of years. I'm almost a year into it. And we've actually set up 4 focus areas. Very quickly, we all acknowledged that there were 4 focus areas that we really needed to focus on as an industry. And those started with culture, was one of the focus areas, training, The second one, the third one was work methods. And then the last one was asset management or engineering out the hazards, right? It's another way of saying essentially what we intend on saying. And so when we first got together in person in October last year, we identified a lead and co-lead for each of the 4 focus areas. And ever since then, we've been trying to define what those focus areas mean and what is it that we want to make sure we deliver on this year in 2024.
Perfect. And I guess just from those that are non-utility members, safety first is kind of a key attribute to really everything we do within a safety. And it is all about what you said, culture. And one thing, we're doing here on the podcast is really starting to use and share stories and language around exactly what we're actively participating on. So when we talk about safety culture, can you share a little bit of like what are the items or discussion points that really come to the forefront and what your team would get together and talk about?
Yeah. So the culture focus area is probably one of the hardest to define and to hone in on what is it that we're going to work on in 24. There's many ways of defining it, but one of the ways I think of it is it's the norms that community has effectively adopted and which drives behaviors and drives feelings and drives habits and drives actions. And so what we're going to focus on in 2024 and what we're beginning to focus on is leadership engagement, leadership's role in culture. And the reality is we as leaders, especially the more senior leaders, we have a critical role in setting those norms. Whether we're silent or we're actively engaged, all those things drive the norms and drive the behaviors and ultimately the actions of our employees. And that's one of the biggest realizations we had at SCE about a year and a half ago as a result of one of my employees passing away, Johnny Kincaid, on the job, is acknowledging that we effectively, by our norms that we had accepted for many, many years, contributed to that event. And that was just unacceptable to us, right? So really, leadership engagement and leadership ownership is one of the big focus areas for 24.
I love it. And I think, one passion of mine is, this idea of, we're in this midst of a transformational change, right? Which is a cultural change of what utilities are here to do and how we can be a part of everything that's going on with the grid. So when we talk about grid mod, you have all of this new technology that is available to really be utilized and used in ways that we have yet to truly understand and define. And so you can think about, 140 years ago when they were coming to the table and talking about, their dynamo and the wire size, right? 2-phase, or should it be 3-phase? What are the concerns? What are the safety? Safety was always something a part of the conversation too, back then. And now here we are from a culture perspective. How can we be that leader in an industry that impacts really all? So I think that's really grand and powerful that the industry leaders has a forum to safely come together. No pun intended was there, but it came out. To be open and transparent and really craft or draft the language that you as leaders can use and take back to your organizations and help really drive. So when we think about the AEIC organization, what's happening in those committee groups, you're not there to create a tool or to develop the new, gadget or gizmo. You're really sharing stories and efforts in that particular space. So as you said, it's hard to define culture, but you come together, like what has worked, what has not worked. Maybe you hear from your peers some different perspectives, different approaches, and that knowledge base is really hard to find. So it's such a, as we like to say at AEIC, it's the best kept secret. And I think the reason why is it's really hard to put the words around, that community that you're building and that leadership, gravitas that you have to really take into, the individual units. Yeah. So for anyone that is a utility member and, from those 4 working groups that you mentioned, which are all incredibly valuable in each of their own, how do you see one becoming engaged and what type of commitment is really expected of your members?
Yeah. So really as you sort of implied, any utility member of AEIC is welcome to join. We promoted the attendance to the subcommittee via our AEIC Power Delivery Committee, the parent committee to the safety subcommittee. And so we have officers in that committee that have actively joined and then actively expand now. And folks, through their network, they encourage their teams to join, right? But it's not every utility is represented on the Power Delivery Committee, and so we welcome any to join. We have about 25 active members right now, as in companies, I should say. And so what we ask is that we have utility executive representation from each of the members. We do want to keep this at not only get into the tactical elements of how to solve each of these things. That happens behind the scenes because we are going to have to get into the tactics, but we really need the level of executive commitment and support and leadership, frankly, to represent their companies onto the safety subcommittee. So you need to be a director or above. We'd like to ideally have an operational representative, so somebody typically from T&D, most likely, and then a safety executive representative. So 2 from each company is what we're trying to achieve. It doesn't always work out that way, but most are able to deliver on that. And so the commitment is, there's no timeline commitment per se. I mean, my role is a 2-year role, right? But then somebody can replace me and I'll be on the committee. Even in terms of your presence is twice a year, meeting in person. So we hosted the first one last October at Southern California Edison. The next one is going to be hosted by other source in early June this year. And every other month, and that's about a 2 or 3 day commitment. And every other month, we hold an 1.5 to 2 hour session, a virtual session. And with a different agenda, obviously, we focus on progress on those 4 focus areas. And then we have an open forum where we talk about significant events that may have occurred in the last 2 months within our respective companies. And that's when the sharing occurs. And then there's some other items about benchmarking that we cover towards the end. So that's the level of high-level commitment. We are asking, obviously, we have 6 leads, so a lead and a co-lead from 8, covering the 4 focus areas. And then we are asking every utility member that is actively participating to pick one of the 4 focus areas to participate in. So, we all have day jobs. This is a well-in day jobs. So that's where the tough part is to make sure that you're giving this the attention that it deserves and delivering on whatever objectives we've set for 2024, right? And oftentimes in these committees, we get together, there's a lot of talk, that in and of itself has value, but we actually struggle to take on an assignment and deliver on that assignment. And that's what we're trying to do here this year in 2024.
Right. So here you are as an individual, you have your daytime job, but knowing that there is a group that is committed to each other to really come to the table to talk, broad safety. And then you guys divide it into the 4 subgroups. So when you say the side, it's more or less, you're going to meet all together in person twice a year, really bringing those 4 subgroups and the conversations that you're having outside of these individuals. So the chair and co-chair take on the increased responsibility of really keeping the group together, driving the conversation, developing the agenda. And then from an utility share, I mean, what we're talking about is drafting, creating, developing a way. So PowerPoint is where we come, but it could even just be a talk on a particular event or activity or something that has been done in your space. And you come to the conversation and kind of create that platform. So that's the type of contribution that you're looking for each member to do over a certain, year time frame. And it could be either in the bigger meetings or in your subgroup meetings. And the power of that, and I think it's where it's hard to find the words, is you're now in contact with peers that are involved in really the same day-to-day heaviness, right? There's not many people, right? Yes, there's 3,000 utilities. We have 180 utility members, but that's, a peer group that really you have access to really craft the conversation and really share amongst each other of what can and cannot be done. So it's very powerful. So since you have 4 subgroups, how about what's the other one that you would like to share to kind of give our audience, areas that they may want to explore with this committee? You spoke about culture, and then you have the asset management and the, engineer safety and, that one, or whatever one's your favorite.
Yeah. Well, they're all my favorites. My fortune, right? So, but I think that the ones that probably can have the greatest impacts on where we are right now in the industry and what we need to really focus on, just based on what everybody else is saying out there through the various conversations we've had as a team, is probably cluster training out of the four. Like I said, all four are really critical. Asset management is still relatively nascent in our industry, but being able to really be intentional about engineering out the hazards is happening. Even without calling it asset management, it's happening, right? As you said, it's been happening for the last 125, 145 years, right? But if we can truly get to culture, especially with how employees, the new generation of employees, right, are evolving, and some of the challenges that we're experiencing today versus maybe 23 years ago, I think that will go such a long way, and it starts with leadership. Training is ultimately how you empower each individual with enough knowledge to keep themselves safe. And provide quality work, right? And deliver pride in your craftsmanship. And training has been, being an O&M activity, for us utilities, has been oftentimes a place where cuts have been made, and we're not necessarily investing collectively in the amounts and the focus they deserve, and how critical it is, right? So those are only the two areas I would say that would have the greatest impact.
Right. And also just to compound, the idea of, training and what it is, right? The new workforce, and really even us as leaders, we're finding our way of learning and absorbing information is being less from paper and transferring of those that have gone before us with their 30, 40 years of experience is not as available. And therefore we're transitioning to a space of video and, digital format and technology in the field. So there's just a whole new space, just not
Yeah.
even for training for utilities, but training for all of us people. So it's
Yeah.
definitely a very important engagement. And so I think just generally knowing the industry, like there's a significant amount of work happening, and it's in these little individual pockets. And I think what a beautiful platform AIC can provide is bringing that voice from many to really share and like drive this need to much more. And so we can start having those effective conversations of like, what is that key, O&M capital, and what the importance, and how do you levy it up to be, have more attention to it so that you can, again, drive that value. So
Yeah.
that's a good one. Well, any like advice for maybe people that are actually engaged or are aware of it, but how they can more or less utilize, because I know when I was a former utility member within the utility, I would go to these meetings and I'd have this amazing amount of share and knowledge all pressed upon myself. But then taking that information and finding the conduit or the way to share it amongst my peers to be a challenge. And so one, thing, and I guess really my new role, is how can we help facilitate that kind of conversation that is extremely valuable, network building, culture forming, and then being a vessel to a large organization. So like from your position, you're looking for the executives and directors, but even as an executive, you have peers and you have to find the space and the time to share. So like, do you have any lessons or maybe shares of how that information can be shared once you learn it to your group that you're beholden to?
I think you're right. That's probably one of the biggest challenges in terms of how to make sure it's conveyed to the right folks. First of all, I think it's making sure that there's awareness of our respective engagement in this safety subcommittee. There's so many subcommittees and committees within AIC. Sometimes we can get lost, and so that's one. Just making sure that at least within my company, people know of my role at AIC. And then secondly is we have a lot of safety initiatives within our company. I'm sure, in fact, I know that other utilities have similar set of initiatives. And we oftentimes refer to the AEIC as one of the benchmarking sources of intelligence about what others have done in this space, right? So we actually, as part of this particular safety segment, have decided to take the lead in establishing a benchmarking mechanism, meaning that we are actually coordinating on behalf of the AIC all benchmarking activities related to safety for right now, until we figure out a better mechanism going forward.
And so we've asked every utility to identify a benchmarking point of contact, a BPC, we like to call it.
And that effectively every ask by any utility of a set of questions on the safety space will go through that BPC at every one of our utilities. Whether it's an ask of them or they have an ask. Their company has an ask, they have someone receives an individual. So there's a network of BPCs that we are coordinating and orchestrating from SCE for right now. And it's still very immature, by the way, so it's not smooth yet. But we want to develop that cadence and that mechanism.
Right.
And ultimately, we want to capture it in some kind of a universal database
where, we can have like something we'd like to actually work with the AEIC on and see if we can develop kind of an engine.
Where you can do searches and because many of these questions that we're asking 10 years ago, similar people in our industry were asking, right? Not to say that 10 years ago is valuable now, but even if it was a year ago, 2 years ago, I am sure those questions are being asked by somebody out there. If we can just capture a bank
of information, I think that would be valuable. And then we publicize right through the AEIC members, and we make it easy for them to go. And whether or not you are a safety subcommittee member or not,
you can access that bank of information from a safety perspective. That's what we want to do, and that's what we're trying to facilitate right now.
So be on the lookout, you utility members, for this benchmarking capability, which that is something from the other committees. There's a strong presence in some of the committees, which we're going to have their own episode where the surveying, but not safety related, is actually a very strong part of their committee as well. Well, Paul, I think this was really informative, and I want to thank you on behalf of the AEIC leadership and really the electric utility industry of your desire and really passion to really drive this forward and kind of kick off safety committee as a whole. There's really large roots within this organization. The power delivery, which you spoke of, was really started over 100 years ago. And it was leaders like you that have kept the conversations going and really keeping that network strong. So again, thank you. And thank you for showing up and sharing this committee with the larger audience.
Well, thanks, Dr. Cook. Appreciate the opportunity.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.